This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Whether you need hosting for your art portfolio, blog, or online store, Squarespace has all the website building, marketing, and analytics tools you need to build a sleek website and grow your brand. That's weird. It's already October. No, please! Why, hello there. If there's one thing synonymous with spooky season, it's the classic monsters. The vampires, the werewolves, basically the rogues gallery featured on this trick-or-treat bag that I still have from 1999. There's been countless iterations of these creatures in media for the past 70 years or so obviously, they're in desperate need of another one. This is really just Kira's fun time again. I have been waiting all summer to use Spooky Halloween Goblin as a victim in my character design nonsense, and since we've established that evil is hot, today I'm going to turn Halloween monsters into a team of villains. Like Kira-style villains. So they're all gonna be cute girls with like mad historical drip and probably some armor. People are strange. So the monsters I'm tackling today are a werewolf, a vampire, a Frankenstein-inspired monster, and because I am famously deathly afraid of the ocean, a Cthulhu, Kraken, creature from the Black Lagoon thing. But I won't be going straight for classic vampire or werewolf because I like to combine concepts a lot with my character designs, so I'll be playing around a lot with related scary concepts like a mad scientist and body horror for Frankenstein's monster, related aesthetic visuals like gothic architecture for my vampire character, and throwing in some historical references to period clothing from when the source material was published or popularized. This is basically just an excuse for me to combine fantasy aesthetics with Regency core, Victorian, and cool armor that I saw on Pinterest. Before we begin, slight content warning for this episode because since it's spooky season, I'll be discussing some tragic death in relation to these characters' backstories, and this episode does feature a bit of body horror, so feel free to skip this one if you aren't into that. To get started, I hit the drawing board and began thumbnailing out all of my ladies in color just to figure out how I wanted to handle their dynamic and to figure out somewhat of a unified color palette. Especially since I wanted to play around with some varied silhouettes and shapes given the body horror aspect of the Frankenstein girl and the more animalistic side of my werewolf girl. I was pretty happy with how these were coming along, but I didn't really get to polish them as much as I wanted to because I famously lost my Apple Pencil in a Starbucks this week, which will henceforth be referred to as the Starbucks Apple Pencil debacle of 2022. Support me on Patreon. So even though I planned to do these on my iPad, I moved to Clip Studio to finish sketching out the girls properly. And now you're seeing what is the third or fourth iteration of some of these characters because I could not come up with something good for these for the life of me. I don't know why I struggled so much, but these were kind of hard. I think the fact that I've been sitting on this idea for so long, combined with such high expectations for making the designs look really cool, made me put a lot of pressure on myself. So just bear with me as we go through the design process for some of these because it is a journey. Please listen to me. If you're going to keep me tied up, the least you can do is tell everyone about this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Fine. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. If there's one thing scarier than supernatural powers, it's the graphic design sensibilities of my source clone. I mean, look at this. There's entirely too much color. Since Squarespace offers dozens of professional and customizable website and portfolio templates, fixing this embarrassment shouldn't take too long. Squarespace has tons of easy customization, like text, colors, and various website pages. With great features like automatic image scaling, I can simply drop in all of my deranged portfolio pieces, which are then beautifully arranged with zero tedious effort. But admittedly, if there's one thing that myself and the original do have in common, it is maximalist taste. So if I want to include my Instagram gallery on my portfolio website, all I have to do is link my Instagram to my portfolio and use a social block to share recent Instagram posts on my portfolio site. From there, all one has to do is simply sit back and enjoy the chaos and sensory overload. That's not all, because if you're looking to sell your nefarious goods online or at conventions, Squarespace has all the tools you need, because they also have an excellent e-commerce platform. I like to link mine to my print-on-demand service for totally hands-free selling. However, if you like to sell your wares in person like at conventions, when you do so using the Squarespace app, your inventory and sales data are kept in sync with your online store. So if you want to slowly take over the identity of your source clone, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/pricklyalpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for funding my malevolent plans to take over the tri-state area. Now, let's get back to creating my supernatural army.
So we are starting off with the say it. Vampire. I think this is the design that I both like the best and also think is the least close to my original intentions. I think she's also unfortunately the weakest thematically, but I'll explain. Similar to the gemstone villains I designed, I conceptualized these villains to be driven by a desire for vengeance because I feel like they needed some backstory to inform their design. I didn't think that villainous spooky monsters would be enough of a character design prompt, given the fact that these characters throughout cinema and fiction have always been depicted as villainous spooky monsters. So I basically needed to put enough of my own spin on these characters to make them actually unique. And spoilers, I feel like I may have failed in that department, but not for a lack of trying. When I began thinking about who I wanted these characters to be and what inspiration I wanted to use to design them, I began chicken scratching a bunch of different thematic ideas on a piece of paper for each character that I hoped would combine nicely to make them more original. And among the list of ideas I had for vampire were concepts like undead, Victorian, widow, corpse bride, Batwoman, and simply Morticia Addams. But somewhere along the way, the nod to the Victorian period and Gothic architecture kind of completely took over, even leaving behind some of the backstory that I originally had for this character. Whoops. The original backstory being a young Victorian bride-to-be dies of tuberculosis and is cursed by a witch to come back to life as a vampire, which would be especially devastating to this character because I imagine she would be very compassionate and sweet when she was alive, with human life being very precious to her. I didn't really add this aspect to her original design, but in life I think it would have been cool if she was studying to become a doctor or had some kind of an interest in medicine, just to really kind of play up the irony of tuberculosis taking her and also the confliction that she would have at drinking people's blood to stay alive as a vampire. Very much Carlisle core, I think. You can definitely see hints of these ideas in the thumbnail designs I did for her, but when Art Kira was having a jolly old time figuring out how to integrate cathedral architecture into a dress, the hints of a white wedding dress stained with blood and overtaken over time by a more Dracula-adjacent aesthetic was pretty much lost. I thought about redoing the design, but my family members actually liked the cathedral dress, and they convinced me to use it in this video. So now that you know what I initially intended, let's talk about what I actually came up with. Since Bram Stoker's Dracula was published at the tail end of the Victorian period, I decided to really lean into the Victorian evening gown silhouette and Gothic architecture. I particularly took these frocks as inspiration for the red and white gown, which morphed into the cathedral dress, with the end silhouette of the cathedral gown being mostly inspired by this dress. Since I didn't want the Dracula influence to be entirely lost in this design, I also added a very spindly high collar and half cloak as references to the original character. And since vampires are often associated with bats, I also worked in the idea that this character is capable of making gargoyles come to life and become her agents of chaos. So I worked that into her dress as well by making her sleeves look like two little bat-esque gargoyles. I also added some little bat creatures into the illustration as well, which were inspired by a fake cryptid I designed last year, which is affectionately known as the Borsog. You've got to watch that video to understand. To really round out the bat motif, I also added some little knots on the top of her head that kind of look like bat ears because I thought it was cute. And I feel like this design really strayed away from the premise, but I also added tons of stained glass designs to the panels because what can I say? It's really cool. As for who I think this character is, while she's most certainly driven by a desire for revenge, I also imagine she's the one of the group who has the most intact conscience and feels extremely conflicted about drinking the blood of humans and doing anything anything inherently cruel. I imagine maybe she has a Dexter thing going on, where she hunts down the most depraved criminals in Victorian London and kills them in order to feed, but perhaps spends most of her time hiding in old, lonely cathedrals to avoid the temptation of innocent human blood. I also feel she takes on the natural leadership role, since I feel like Dracula is usually depicted as the brains of the operation when these monsters are teamed up with each other, but I feel like her personality would definitely clash with my Swamp Cthulhu Kraken girl, because she is going to be the most evil and probably wants to be the brains of the operation herself. Anyways, take the little stories as a grain of salt. They're really just there to inform the designs, but I really do like this character, even though I feel like she's not fully realized, and I honestly kind of want to make this dress because it turned out kind of cool, so let me know if you want to see that. Next, we are moving on to Dr. Frankenstein and her monster, because since Frankenstein was written by a woman, Mary Shelley, I just wanted to throw that into the mix with my version. Also, I know this won't matter to a single one of you, but today I learned that Mary Shelley was married to Percy Shelley, who was the author of the poem Ozymandias, which is also the title of the best episode of Breaking Bad and pays off the story of Walter White in a beautifully thematic way. And Walter White is one of the best villains of all time, and that's why this information is relevant to the video. Do with that what you will. Anyways, so my initial idea for these villains was that they died and came back to life as a cursed and macabre version of themselves. This one is a little more messed up. My idea for Dr. Frankenstein is that her father died from a sudden unfortunate cause, and she, a young scientist with a pre-existing fascination with alchemy, made a deal with our mystery witch to learn the secrets of necromancy in exchange for her own sanity. As you may guess, her attempts to bring her father back to life did not go well, and she is left with a monstrous, reanimated cadaver that can neither speak nor fully move on its own. But it's something, so she convinces herself that the witch didn't share the full secrets of bringing someone back to life with her, and joins the others to track her down and learn the secret to immortality. Maybe she's convinced the witch has or knows where the Philosopher's Stone is, and she can use that to fully reanimate her father. Or maybe I just have Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood brain rot. I don't really know. My original idea for this character was to bring it into more of a solid body horror situation and make her kind of start mutilating herself a little bit in her experimentation. I decided to maybe not go that route because I don't know if you guys would be into that. Anyways, I am so sorry you had to hear that and if it's upsetting to you, but it led to an unreasonably fun character design experience for me. And if you're wondering where some of the awful inspiration for the backstories for this video come from, I spent some time this week on the subreddit r/I'm sorry John, and I think it just seeped into my soul a little bit. I am no longer the same person. Since Frankenstein was originally published in 1818, the tail end of the Regency period, that's the dress silhouette I decided to go with, albeit with a grotesque, horrifying man growing out of her back. I originally colored the dress the common pastel plums and whites of the period, but later exchanged it with this dress. The embroidery on the bust and sleeves reminded me of rib cages and bones, so even though it isn't a super original design, because I'm kind of just using a historical dress, I felt like it was perfect for this character. From there, I leaned into common mad scientist tropes, some funky goggles, oversized gloves, potions and syringes everywhere, and let us not forget the classic corpse in a backpack trope, which was kind of inspired by the abominations from the Owl House. You can see it in the eyes. I probably went a little too far with the gore on this one, but trust me, I showed a lot of restraint. For the corpse, I basically went the classic Frankenstein's monster route, but put him in some lovely Regency clothing and gave him a spooky little face that I actually think is kind of cute. And to complete Dr. Frankenstein's design, I gave her some Bride of Frankenstein-inspired gray streaks in her hair because she's just gone so insane that I think the stress is turning her hair gray. As for her characterization, I figure since this character is just so completely out of her gourd, she actually has a pleasant yet unsettling demeanor. She probably jokes around a lot, talks to herself, and is a little ditzy. Think Entrapta from She-Ra or Luna Lovegood from Harry Potter, but with the literal ability to raise the dead. She's kind and caring, being the unifying insanity between the vampire's generally good-natured ideals and the unbridled rage of the later two. Oh boy, we'll get to them. But you also know she is capable of some pretty awful things. I mean, she literally carries a festering corpse around in a backpack, so she is, to put it lightly, unwell. But since she knows a thing or two about science and necromancy, she's probably the group's only chance at returning to a human form, so she secretly carries a wish to not only save her dad, but the rest of the group as well. You might think, oh, that doesn't sound so evil, but But just how many undead husks of a human being is she willing to create before she is successful? That is the question. Next we have the werewolf character, and because the concept of werewolves has existed since ancient Rome and Greece but seemed to really catch on in the mid-20th century, I didn't really know where to place this character in terms of historical inspiration. My original idea was to have her either be a 1950s or 1980s schoolgirl killed by a hazing incident and turned into a werewolf, but it just seemed too modern when compared to my other inspirations. So after drawing several iterations of the character in a more modern-inspired outfit, I said nah and decided to go way back in time, specifically to the 16th century Renaissance era, since apparently there was a bit of a werewolf craze due to the church's fear of witchcraft. So since this character was placed in an older setting now, I also decided to take light inspiration from Red Riding Hood, which was popularized around the 1700s when the Brothers Grimm published their version. So my backstory for this character was that she was a peasant girl who was tricked to go into the forest alone by some vile boys training to be squires, and then was lost in the forest and killed by a pack of wolves. And in order to do some mischief, our witch brings the girl back to life as a werewolf, and the girl then masquerades as a terrifying werewolf knight, slowly picking off the boys responsible for her death, and later joining our little group of monsters to get revenge on the witch. Why is she a knight in armor, you may ask? I don't know, it's cool. I also saw these pauldrons on Pinterest and convinced myself I'd work them into this character's design somehow. So I imagine the pauldrons are a bit of a signifier of her clan, because yes, wolves did kill her, but ironically, wolves are now the only thing that will accept her because of her grotesque form. So yes, the armored look was a bit of a stretch, and I obviously had some difficulty with the design of this character, but I wanted her to be strong, tall werewolf lady, and something about a wolfy woman in a full suit of berserker armor and a big sword sold that idea in my mind, but that's probably as far as that thought pattern goes, especially since my inspiration notes for this character had such high concept ideas as Twilight Core and feminine rage. Anyways, like I said, I added some wolfy pauldrons to the armor and eventually a wolf motif to her sword, and I'm thinking she probably stole her armor from a knight in her hometown that she killed out of revenge, and maybe the armor in her region has a pre-existing wolf motif because perhaps slaying wolves and other dangerous animals was a big part of a knight's job, and now she wears it out of irony as a battle trophy, probably further customizing it with teeth and moon designs as a werewolfy nod to the full moon. Anyways, to hint at the very shallow Red Riding Hood reference, I gave her a tattered cape and some fluffy red hair pulled into a ponytail, and later on added a tattered purple frock underneath her armor to suggest maybe she was wearing a dress when she was still human, and I cropped that dress pretty short to try to suggest she was much smaller when she was still alive. Human. You get the idea. I was also really indecisive with the coloration of the tattered dress because I was originally going to make it white like a chemise, but purple ended up unifying her more with the other characters. But purple was also a very rare dye in this time period, and I don't think a peasant would have been able to afford it. As to who this character is, she's probably pretty angry and jaded. I feel like she's pretty stoic and untrusting, feeling like she was robbed of her childhood by the world's cruelty and can't even return to her family because they'd see her as a monster and probably try to kill her. She's definitely trying to get revenge on that same witch, but she probably shares a particular bond with our final character because of the similarities in their backstories. Which brings us to our final design, the Cthulhu, Kraken, creature from the Black Lagoon character that really ended up being much more of a siren-inspired character given her backstory, but the Eldritch Horror sea monsters still apply, don't worry. So the backstory for this character was that during a voyage with her father, their ship was raided by pirates, and she and her entire family were forced to walk the plank and subsequently drowned. And their bodies were maybe also devoured by sea creatures, but only maybe, because is that too dark for my channel? Just remember this is Spooky Kira talking. She was then cursed by that same mischievous witch to come back to life as a horrifying sea monster with the ability to control whatever lies in the depths of the Marianas Trench, probably Eldritch Horror sea monsters, and lure sailors and pirates to their death, destroying large ships that are the pride of the British Navy in a fit of rage, forever on a quest to track down the pirates who killed her and her family to exact revenge. So the design you're seeing first that is probably on screen now is not the design I ended up going for this character. I know that will likely make some of you sad, but I definitely struggled to find the through line with her as well, and in the end, while the design is a cool siren, sea monster girl, the original historical inspiration I had for her didn't really translate. Since The Call of Cthulhu was published by H.P. Lovecraft in 1928, I wanted to pull some 1920s flapper influence into her design. That's the inspiration you saw in the first few thumbnails at the beginning of the video, and I generally liked this idea, but I could never manage to make it look enough like a siren, enough like a flapper, and enough like an Eldritch eldritch horror monster, so some of that inspiration didn't really end up carrying through. Especially since I'm assuming piracy was less of a problem in the 1920s, since the golden age of piracy took place between the 1650s and the 1730s, and the Wikipedia pages for piracy around the 1920s are completely blank, so I really have no idea. That means this character isn't really based in any particular time. Maybe she's based around the beginning of the 1700s, because I imagine there's probably lots of pirate tales about sirens from around that time, but all these characters are probably immortal anyways, so who cares really? Her design is a horrifying amalgamation of the creatures who ate her many eyes linking her to the sea creatures she now controls. For lack of better ideas, I played around with clothing her in moss and seaweed as a reference to the creature from the Black Lagoon, and also used the same spindly fins present on that creature as inspiration for her design. I originally tried to add in a fun seaweedy flapper dress, but couldn't quite get it to work the way I wanted with her tentacles. I did last minute go in and add a bit more characterization by working in pearls, gold, and gemstones that she would steal back from the pirates she kills and keep as a trophy. Like I said, she shares the bond with the werewolf character of being robbed of your childhood and forced to live out your years as a monster, separated from your family. But I think since the pirates did such a horrible thing to her, she feels very justified in carrying out her revenge, almost like she's the hero despite killing so many people. I think she would probably be pretty narcissistic and manipulative, only using others as a means to an end for the most part, and only really caring about her werewolf friend on a surface level. Or is that just what she's trying to convince others, an attempt to remain detached from people? Who knows? Anyways, in short, she also hates the witch that cursed her to live this awful, monstrous existence, and also wants revenge on her. Who is the witch, you might ask? Well, maybe I'll design her in a future episode. Anyways, here are the finished designs. They've definitely grown on me a bit since I finished them, but I also feel like this idea isn't fully realized. I really wish their designs were more unified. I wish their backstory and motivation showed through more in their designs, and I know I could have pushed them a lot more, but this is just what happens whenever I don't really have enough time to flesh out a concept, and also when I design 4 characters in a video instead of my usual 3. But I also feel it's important to showcase the areas where my character design skills need some work, and also sometimes roll with a cool idea even if it's not initially what I intended. This is a group that might actually get a revamp in the future because I feel there's a lot of fun stuff here that I could push in a redesign, so let me know if you would want to see that. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think of the designs, and feel free to add on to their dynamics and backstories. I always really enjoy reading what you guys have to say in the comments. And as always, let me know what names you think I should give them. Thank you all so much for watching this very silly Halloween video, and a special thank you goes to all my wonderful new patrons, especially my executive producers: Owlian, Bean the Bread, Bobo McFo, Gravity Drop, Hypnos, India, Jessica Dilling, Katie, Michael Twy Cross, I am so sorry, Panda Pie 365, Refnlings, I'm sorry, Silver, Sweet Winter Garden, Welly Kelly, and Will Schmidt. If you want to support what I do here, especially as I branch out into bigger projects, please consider becoming a member of my Patreon. The link will be in my description. It's just a couple of bucks, and when you support me, I really appreciate it. So I heard that when Stanley Kubrick was filming The Shining, he would make Shelley Duvall and Jack Nicholson do multiple takes, like into the triple digits, until their performance just got so ridiculous and so insane that it actually delivered the horrific effect that he was looking for. And part of me is just like, I kind of feel like that's what's happening with this Squarespace ad.